This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Nintendo is clearly trying to build as large of a Switch Online audience as possible, which means they're gonna drip feed our precious retro games to the bitter end. So why not cosplay as a Nintendo executive today and try to predict what retro games we'll be getting for the entirety of Switch 2. Now, I'm aware that a lot of games like Contra, Castlevania, and Mega Man already have collections on the Switch, but that doesn't mean they still can't come to Switch Online eventually. Sonic 2 as an example is on Switch Online, but you can also purchase that through different compilations, so I may add those at some point down the line. So let's briefly take a look at what's already out and see if we can find any patterns. 2018 was the start of Switch Online, and we got 35 NES games. This includes the special and Japanese exclusives as well. And wow, things sure were lackluster. To say we were disappointed with the selection is being generous. But then 2019 rolls around, and that gave us another 40 NES games, but also added the Super Nintendo to the service. Wow, crazy! And with that came 25 SNES games, giving us a total of 65 games for 2019. That might not sound like very much to you, but that's actually the most Switch Online titles we've ever gotten in 1 year. And it'll likely be the highest amount we'll ever get. Then 2020 rolled around, and that introduced us to 10 NES and 18 SNES games, giving us 28 for the entire year. Which, geez, looking back, that was a pretty rough year for the service on top of, the entire world. Next is 2021 with 3 NES and 14 SNES games. And hold on to your butts here, because in 2021, Nintendo did the unthinkable. After all this time, they finally gave us Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis. For N64, we got 10 games and Genesis 20 games. So that gives us 47 for 2021. So while it's still not that many, at least the console selection got a lot more interesting. But moving on to 2022, we got 5 NES, 15 SNES, 13 N64, and 17 Genesis games, which gives us a total of 50 games for that year. I'd say at this point in time, the price tag for both different services is starting to actually feel somewhat valuable. Paying 20 or 50 bucks a year at first felt like a ripoff, but now there's quite a bit to pick from. That's of course assuming you actually play retro games. Otherwise, why bother getting the expansion pack? But then came 2023, which gave us 5 NES, 1 SNES, 8 N64, and 8 Genesis games. But things got spicy once again since Nintendo added Game Boy and Game Boy Advance to the catalog. With those handhelds, we got 19 Game Boy and 13 Game Boy Advance games, giving us a total of 54 titles in 2023. This was probably the best year we've seen on the service. Finally getting the Game Boy lineup really solidified the value of Switch Online, and as long as a bunch of games don't get delisted over time, this could actually end up being a really damn good service to have. Now, before predicting Switch 2's lineup, we've gotten a few titles already for this year. Now, we're gonna assume that Switch 2 is launching in 2025, so we might as well predict what's also releasing this year. As of now, there's been 2 for NES, 2 for SNES, 1 for N64, 3 for Game Boy, and 3 for Game Boy Advance. So we're at 11 titles currently. In terms of trying to find patterns, the main things that I've noticed is that we tend to get around 40 to 50 games a year, and that amount tends to be a little bit higher when a new console or handheld comes out. So my goal when making predictions is to have roughly that amount for every year depending on the value of the games. So with that, let's get started. April. I don't think we're going to get much of anything outside of 2 Game Boy titles that we're already aware of. And these games are F-Zero Maximum Velocity and Kiero no Tame ni Kane wa Naru. I could also see another special game dropping, and Super Mario 64 would be a perfect pick. A lot of people struggle to get 100% because of the controls, so having the option to try out the enhanced triple jump and use the cannon would be really nice. May. This will be another calm month, but with some underrated picks. We'll get 2 NES games, those being DuckTales and Castlevania, and 1 for the N64, which is Snowboard Kids. All of these games aren't very popular, but are well worth trying out for retro enthusiasts. June. This month is going to get a little bit spicier. We'll get ActRaiser for the SNES, as well as Super Mario Land and Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy. I'm thinking of Mario Land and Mario Bros. Deluxe simply because Nintendo wants to continue rolling off the Mario hype, and around this time, we'll have the Thousand Year Door and Luigi's Mansion 2 remakes, so this would add on to that pretty nicely. July. So the Genesis is an interesting console because they've already added a bunch of their best titles. With that said, however, they are still missing a few, which will be added this month, and it'll seem totally pointless. Finally, we're gonna get Sonic 1, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and Aladdin! Both of these Sonic games don't really need to exist, but again, Sonic 2's already been a part of Switch Online for quite a while, so it was only a matter of time. And then Aladdin for the Genesis is another sleeper hit. This could potentially pair well with Epic Mickey Rebrushed, since we already know that's coming out at some point this year. August. It's been like 5 seconds since Nintendo released Kirby content, so we're finally getting Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland for the GBA, as well as another special game, Yoshi's Island. Nightmare in Dreamland is another cool one since it also has multiplayer. As for Yoshi's Island getting a special game, I mean, it's a really hard one to get 100% for. There's also a good handful of unlockable levels that a lot of people have probably never played. September. This will be another quiet month, with the only release being Mischief Makers for the N64. At least 19 people will be excited, and that's it. October. Next, we've got a couple of SNES games, these being Tetris Attack and Soul Blazer. Tetris Attack is kind of a given. We already have Pokemon Puzzle League and Panel Upon, so why not add this version as well? We all know Nintendo likes to throw in obscure retro games, and this fits the bill pretty well. November. As far as we currently know, there isn't a new Pokemon game coming out this year, but the Pokemon Company still has to release something, so I think this is the year. We're finally gonna get Gens 1 through 3 on Switch Online. So Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal, Fire Red, Leaf Green, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. Now, I know this sounds a bit extreme, but I imagine by now that the Pokemon Bank on the 3DS will cease to function entirely. So I'd like to think that these games will be functional with Pokemon Home. And let's keep in mind that this would also be one of the biggest Switch Online announcements ever. Just imagine getting to battle online and trade with players without the link cable or a 3DS. This would be a huge hit for the fans. Either that's gonna happen, or Nintendo will sell the games individually for $15 each. Either way, this does kind of feel like the year for Pokemon Company to finally do this. December. And to wrap things up for the year, we'll just get one N64 game, Super Smash Bros. I don't see Nintendo releasing any big games this year since Switch 2 is coming up, so dropping this and Pokemon at the end would be a nice surprise for everyone. So that gives us a total of 39 games for 2024. You may have noticed that I purposefully made this year really light on interesting releases, and that's because Switch 2 is probably going to come out early 2025, and if that's the case, they're going to be saving their big guns for when that console launches, so let's just get right into 2025. January. Things are going to start off pretty slowly with 3 NES and 1 Game Boy game. I'm thinking we'll get Battletoads, Ring King, and Batman for the NES, as well as Donkey Kong 94 for the Game Boy. Again, Nintendo is saving their big hitters when the Switch 2 might happen, so we're not going to get anything too crazy. But honestly, all 4 of these games are pretty good in their own rights. February. After the crazy Pokemon drops, and with Pokemon Z through A on the way, we'll get 1 more GBA and 2 special GBA games. The new GBA title is Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire, because it only makes sense after all the Pokemon games just released. And then for the special games, we'll get Super Mario Advance 4 and Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Because again, these games can be a little tough to 100%, and both of them have a form of level select once you clear them. March. This is it. The month that I'm guessing the Switch 2 will drop. So what could Nintendo do to further entice people to buy this over the original Switch? Well, think about it. What is the one console that people have been begging Nintendo to make a virtual console for ever since the Wii days? I'll give you a hint. Starts with a G, ends with Gamecube. Yes, that's right. The Nintendo Gamecube is finally coming to Switch Online. But only for Switch 2 owners. And that's where they get you. The day the Switch 2 launches, 7 GameCube games will drop too. These include The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, Super Mario Sunshine, Mario Party 4, Beautiful Joe, Star Fox Assault, Super Monkey Ball, and Super Monkey Ball 2. You can of course use your original GameCube to play these games, or just the Joy-Con/Pro Controller, and whatever the new controllers are going to be. Or you can buy the brand new Switch GameCube controller. This will look almost the same as the regular one, except it'll have more face buttons. The extra buttons include a select, screen cap, and home button. Plus, there's going to be an extra Z button if you want to properly use this controller with other Switch games. And its last feature is adding in a microphone, just in case you want to play any microphone-based GameCube games. But that's not all we're getting. We'll also get 2 SNES games this month. These include SimCity and Zombies Ate My Neighbors. They're both beloved titles, but let's be honest, they're going to be overshadowed and are just being thrown in to make the Switch 2 hype a little more exciting. The GameCube games will help fill any release gaps the Switch 2 might have. April. This month also has a lot of huge releases, just to keep the Switch 2 excitement going. We'll get 2 N64 and 4 GameCube titles. For N64, we'll finally get the rare titles we've been waiting for, Banjo-Tooie and Diddy Kong Racing. And for GameCube, we'll get Luigi's Mansion, Wave Race Blue Storm, 1080 Avalanche, and Soul Calibur 2. I tried to pick out a lot of variety for this month, because only a small amount of Switch 2 games will be out, so having having these larger and more dynamic Switch Online titles will help fill in the gaps. May. Things are gonna calm down a little bit for Switch Online, but there'll still be a couple of big hits. I'm guessing we'll get one SNES, one Game Boy, and 3 GameCube games. For SNES, Super Mario RPG sounds right. It'll have been a few years since the remake came out, so for those people that are interested in trying out the original, this will be an easy way to do that. Then for Game Boy, we'll get Mario's Picross. And finally, the 3 GameCube games will be Mario Kart Double Dash, Killer 7, and Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. So again, I was trying to get a bunch of variety for this month. Also, I think throwing in Double Dash would be perfect, since we'll likely have to wait until later in 2025 to get the new Mario Kart, so it's kind of perfect for filling that gap. And even better, Switch Online will allow us to finally experience seamless land play in Double Dash. June. After all that craziness, June will be pretty mellow with 3 Genesis games: Vector Man, Vector Man 2, and Streets of Rage 3. You'll notice that a lot of these Genesis picks will be from games that were previously on Wii's Virtual Console, which I feel increases the likelihood of them coming to the Switch eventually. July. It'll be pretty calm as well, with 1 GameCube and 2 NES games, the GameCube title being Battalion Wars, and the NES games being Duck Hunt and Adventure Island. The interesting one to see working would be Duck Hunt, since you normally need a light gun for it to even work, but the Wii U version was able to circumvent this problem with a reticle on screen at all times, and I don't see why the Switch version can't do the same thing with the Joy-Cons and Pro Controller. The only weird thing about bringing this game on is that you couldn't use the official NES Switch controller, as there's no motion controls. But at the same time, it's just as bizarre that Duck Hunt of all NES games hasn't been added. August. This month will be a bit more of a packed one, with 1 GameCube, 3 Game Boy, and 2 Game Boy Advance games. We'll get Tales of Symphonia for the GameCube to start, then Kirby Pinball Land, Alfred Chicken, and Dragonheart for the Game Boy. And finally, Klonoa Empire of Dreams and Drill Dozer for Game Boy Advance. So it's a lot of niche but great titles that haven't had much recognition on the Switch's platform. September. Next is 2 N64 and 2 NES games. We've got Space Station Silicon Valley and Tetrasphere for N64, and then Life Force and Bubble Bobble for NES. These games feel like they should be included on Switch Online because they're pretty underrated. Like, Tetrasphere is 3D Tetris, but actually done right. You'd be surprised how fun it is. October. Despite the Switch 2 being new, Nintendo only needs to drop 1 game this month, and that is Kirby Air Ride. The internet explodes because finally we can play City Trial online. It's a huge deal until everyone forgets about it 2 weeks later. November. This is another month with 1 big release, as well as a special game since it's been a while since getting one of those. We'll get Chrono Trigger and Super Mario All-Stars Special, so 2 SNES titles. Chrono Trigger is just another game that deserves to be on Switch Online, and having a special version for Super Mario All-Stars makes a lot of sense since that game has level select as well. December. And finally, to wrap up the year, we'll get 4 Game Boy Advance games. These include V-Rally 3, Game & Watch Gallery 4, Metroid Zero Mission, and Zone of the Enders: The First of Mars. While the Metroid game will be a big hit, the reason this month is relatively calm is because the Switch 2's big first-party games will have dropped around this time frame. So obviously, they're going to want to push that excitement more towards those titles than Switch Online. And that gives us 50 games for 2025. This could by far be one of the best years that Switch Online has ever had. With the addition of the GameCube games, people will be raving about how amazing the Switch 2 is, and then Switch 1 owners will feel gypped. Anyway, let's move on to 2026. January. Starting the year off, we've got 2 NES and 3 GameCube games. NES gets Castlevania 2 and Castlevania 3, while the GameCube gets Mario Party 5, SSX 3, and a Japanese exclusive, Doshin the Giant. It'll be a bit of a wonky month, but people will still be happy about Mario Party, and the fact that Doshin the Giant has suddenly become accessible to play. February. Next is 3 Game Boy games, and that's about it. Again, Nintendo is in the middle of dropping big first-party titles, so they're trying to be careful on what they bring to the table in the first couple of years. We'll get Game & Watch Gallery 2, Mega Man Extreme, and Mega Man Extreme 2. All these are decent enough games, but nothing mind-blowing. March. The people have been clamoring for this next game. This is the month we finally get Donkey Kong 64 and a special version of Super Mario Bros. Lost Levels. It's shocking DK64 took so long to make it to Switch Online, so we're all going to be excited for it for 4 days. And the special version of the Lost Levels will be underappreciated, since its save file will warp you right to World 9, so that way you can more easily play that world as well as Worlds A through D. April. This will be a pretty meh month for most people. We'll get 2 GameCube and 2 Genesis games. The GameCube includes Yu-Gi-Oh! Falsebound Kingdom, as well as a special version for Super Mario Sunshine. The Genesis will add Shadowrun, and a special version for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. Both special games will be nice inclusions, but the other 2 titles are for much smaller audiences. May. Nobody thought it was possible, but the GameCube game dropping this month is F-Zero GX. Nintendo finally did it! And they'll also release 2 Game Boy games, which include Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3, and Wario Land 2. All these games are pretty great, but F-Zero GX will by far be the highlight of the month. And that's the last time Nintendo's going to acknowledge F-Zero until the 2030s. Enjoy it while you can. June. This will be another chill month, with only 3 SNES games coming out. These include Secret of Mana, Contra 3 The Alien Wars, and UN Squadron. All these titles are really fun, but are going to be forgotten about because people are still stoked about playing GameCube games on their Switch. July. We'll get 2 more GameCube games this month. These include Animal Crossing and Chibi Robo. Both are going to be really popular, and it'll also be interesting to see the response of younger people playing the GameCube version of Animal Crossing after playing so much of New Horizons on the Switch. August. This will be a decent month, with 2 Game Boy and 2 Game Boy Advance games. The Game Boy titles are Game & Watch Gallery and Mystical Ninja starring Goemon, and for Game Boy Advance, we'll get Mario Party Advance and Sonic Battle. It's pretty clear that Sonic Battle is going to be the big one here, since it's never gotten a re-release before. September. Stinker months are basically required to happen every once in a while, and this is going to be one of them. For NES, we'll get Galaga and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then Game Ground for Genesis. They aren't bad games per se, but not exciting in the slightest. October. This month is going to do something pretty interesting. We're going to get 3 GameCube and 1 Game Boy Advance game. For GameCube, we're getting Mario Power Tennis, Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, Ikaruga, and then for Game Boy Advance, we'll get Mario Tennis Power Tour. The reason for bringing in 2 different Mario Tennis games is because they normally link together and you can transfer data from the GBA to the GameCube. So it'd be really cool if you could do the same thing with Switch Online. November. This will be another solid month, with 3 N64 and 1 GameCube game. N64 will have Perfect Dark, Rocket Robot on Wheels, and a special version of Super Smash Bros. And the GameCube will get a special game for F-Zero GX. So it'll be a solid month, especially if you're into F-Zero and have been having trouble getting through the campaign and unlocking everything for it. December. 3 Game Boy Advance games are going to blow the Switch 2 out of the water. Finally, we're going to have re-releases of Sonic Advance, Sonic Advance 2, and Sonic Advance 3. This trilogy will be a big celebration, and Sonic fans will proceed to be mad at Sega for not making widescreen versions to make the games a lot better. And that'll be all the games for 2026, totaling us out to 40. So not as high of quantity, but I really tried to pick a higher quality of games this time. At the end of 2026, Switch 2 will be around 1 to 2 years old, and I'm assuming that most people are at this point are going to be really satisfied with the service, not knowing that 2027 is actually going to get even crazier. January. As usual, January will be a pretty relaxed month with 1 N64 and 1 GBA game. We'll get Cruisin' USA for the N64 and Mario vs. Donkey Kong for GBA. At this point in time, it'll have been a few years since the remake came out, and just like with Super Mario RPG, more people would likely be interested in trying out the original. February. Things are about to get spicy. Nintendo will finally be introducing a brand new console, the Nintendo DS. Now, there's a lot of information that needs to be shared. First off, you'll be able to play all these games using the same options the Wii U Virtual Console had. If you don't remember what that was like, well, there was multiple different layouts you could use to play the games on the DS, and Nintendo is also going to come out with a new Switch Online accessory. It will quite literally just be a light attachable screen, pretend this is it, and it'll slide onto the Switch 2, and it's going to come with a stylus. It'll be priced at $79.99 and is only available for Switch Online members, and its only purpose is to make playing DS games a bit easier handheld-wise. On top of that, Nintendo is going to introduce brand new pricing options for their service. You can pay for all the consoles and handhelds as a bundle for $59.99 a year, so yes, the price is going to go up again, or you can choose to only pay for specific consoles. So basically, the base cost will always be $20 a year, and it comes with NES, SNES, and Game Boy games no matter what, but you could also add Game Boy Advance for an additional $10, N64 for $10, Genesis for $10, GameCube for $20, and DS for $10. So technically speaking, if you would get all the consoles as a bundle deal, you'd save $20 a year, as getting them all separately would cost $80 a year compared to $60 a year. This new pricing model is going to be extremely controversial no matter what happens here, and a lot of people are just going to feel skewed to just get the bundle and pay the $60 a year. But in general, people are really going to appreciate the option to be able to only pay for one or two consoles if they're not interested in all of them. In fact, this might cost Nintendo a little bit of a loss in revenue if people only pay for, let's say, GameCube games. But having this extra option and extra flexibility is going to bring in more long-term subscribers. And the family plan, of course, will still be included in all this, so even if the pricing does go up a little bit more, it still won't be that much if you are splitting it up with a bunch of friends. And to think we haven't even gotten to the games for this month. They're going to drop 9 of them to launch the DS. We'll get Super Mario 64 DS, Picross 3D, Meteos, Brain Age, The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, Yoshi Touch and Go, Pack Picks, Retro Game Challenge, and Infinite Space. So this is going to be a really packed month. But in general, most will be happy that DS games are just finally available, even if it does cost a little bit extra. March. After that wild month, March will also be pretty great as well, with 2 SNES and 4 DS games. For the SNES, we'll get Super Bonk and Super Star Wars, while DS will give us Mario Kart DS, Golden Sun Dark Dawn, Tetris DS, and WarioWare Touched. So there's a lot of great stuff here, and most of the staple DS games will be included in the first couple of months. April. This will be another solid one with 2 GameCube and 2 GBA games. For GameCube, we'll get The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures and Skies of Arcadia Legends. Game Boy Advance will get Astro Boy The Omega Factor and Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. So a lot of variety for this month, and people are going to be pretty happy to be able to play 4 Swords Adventures online. May. Next month we've got 2 N64, 1 Genesis, and 2 DS games. We'll get Conker's Bad Fur Day and Bomberman Hero for N64, then Banana Bros for Genesis. And the DS will have Kirby Squeak Squad and a special version of Super Mario 64 DS. So all in all, another great month with Conker and Kirby being included. Most of the big rare games are on the N64 at this point, so it's going to be a lot harder to find N64 titles that are still enticing. June. We'll get 1 DS and 3 Game Boy games. The DS one being Mario and Luigi Partners in Time, and Game Boy will be Donkey Kong Land, Donkey Kong Land 2, and Donkey Kong Land 3. So once again, a bunch of solid titles to help incentivize the cost increase that just happened a few months ago. July. This will be the first calmish month since the DS launched. In July, we'll get 2 NES and 2 Game Boy games. These include Ninja Gaiden 2 and Xanac for the NES, and Pokemon Puzzle Challenge and Trip World for Game Boy, although Trip World will be Japanese exclusive. So nothing too crazy here, but it'll be funny to have yet another version of Panel to Pond for basically no reason. August. This month, we're just getting 1 DS game because it's a banger, and that of course is New Super Mario Bros. It'll be a big thing because people will relearn that it actually has multiplayer modes that can now be played through Switch Online. September. So this is going to be a bit of a weird month because Nintendo is finally going to split Game Boy and Game Boy Color into its own separate apps. And really the only reason it's doing that is because it's getting a little bit cluttered, and now that there's so many games on the service, it actually makes sense to split them apart now. So this month, we'll also get 2 Game Boy Color and 1 DS game. The Game Boy Color ones being Maggie Nation and Croc 2, while the DS will get Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars. And people online will make jokes about how this is the only GTA game Nintendo will ever get, since the odds of them getting GTA 6 is very small. October. We have another great month here with 1 DS and 3 GBA games. For the DS, we're getting Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, and the Game Boy Advance will give us WarioWare Twisted, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, and Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. All of these being really great games, and we already know WarioWare Twisted is more than possible since Kirby Tilt and Tumble works with the Switch controller's motion sensors. November. This is going to be a pretty strange month with 3 GameCube games. We'll get Eternal Darkness, Metroid Prime, and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. People are going to be very confused by this because, well, there's a Metroid Prime 1 remake, and at this point there's probably a Metroid Prime 2 remake, but you know what? They did it anyway because Nintendo does whatever they want. But hey, Eternal Darkness will be a really surprising one to see return, so there's that. December. And to wrap up the year, we'll get 3 DS and 2 Genesis titles. The DS ones include The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, Big Brain Academy, and a special version of New Super Mario Bros. The Genesis will get Sonic 3D Blast and Forgotten Worlds. So overall, a couple more solid titles to finish things up. And that gives us 47 games for 2027. I think people at this point will have just accepted the higher price tag as expected, although there are going to be a few that have been dedicated to only getting GBA or only getting GameCube, but most just have the bundle and call it a day there. Switch Online is going to be full of content at this point. So many games here. We're actually approaching the 10-year mark, which means that if there is licenses, there's a chance that some third-party games only had a 10-year license, and this is where we start to see stuff get delisted. But hopefully that's few and far between. But anyway, let's move on to 2028. January. We're starting things strong with one DS and 3 N64 games, those being Metroid Prime Hunters for the DS, and then N64 gets Ogre Battle 64, Goemon's Great Adventure, and a special version of Mario Party. Yeah, as you can tell, N64 is pretty much dried up of its big games, so we'll start seeing a lot of weird and obscure stuff. February. This month will be another packed one with 2 DS, 2 GBA, and 1 GameCube title. The DS will bring us Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky. GBA will have Wario Land 4 and Pac-Man Collection, while the GameCube will have Pac-Man World 2. So we've got a good amount of variety for this month. Although Pac-Man World 2 may seem redundant since by this point, there's a chance we'll already have a full-on remake of that game. I hope. Please? Namco? March. A bit of a smaller month this time, with 1 DS and 2 Game Boy games. DS will bring us Mario Party DS, and Game Boy Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, and Kid Dracula. Younger fans will discover just how amazing Mario Party DS is, and also that there's more than 2 Kid Icarus games. April. Nothing too crazy this month. We'll get 2 NES and 3 SNES games. The NES will bring us Ninja Gaiden 3 and Double Dragon 3 The Sacred Stones, while the SNES will have Super Castlevania 4, Mario Paint, and Mario & Wario, which is Japan only. Now, Mario Paint and Mario & Wario of course require a SNES mouse, so it'd be really interesting to see how Nintendo tries to circumvent that issue. I'm thinking the best solution here is to replace the mouse with either motion controls or the right joystick on a Joy-Con or Pro Controller, so these two games wouldn't really be compatible with SNES's Switch Online controller, which is really strange, but again, it's also strange these games aren't here, especially Mario Paint. May. This time we're getting 2 GameCube and 1 GBA game. GameCube will include Mario Golf Toadstool Tour and Star Fox Adventures, while the GBA will include Mario Golf Advance Tour. Like with the Mario Tennis games several months ago, they're both releasing at the same time so the compatibility can actually function properly. June. This month is gonna be a bit smaller with only 2 DS games. The 2 games will be Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure. Both titles are beloved by Sonic fans, and people will be stoked to see these re-released after so long. July. Another small drop with 1 GBA and 1 Genesis game. We'll get DK King of Swing for GBA and Splatterhouse 2 for Genesis. Not much to really add about these two, but it's gonna be interesting to see people learn about this DK game because nobody really talks about it anymore. August. We'll get 2 N64 and 2 GameCube games. This will be a pretty exciting month for a lot of people. N64 includes Quest 64 and Ridge Racer 64, while GameCube has Mario Party 6 and Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. All 4 games are vastly different, and the Mario Parties are of course perfect for something like Switch Online. September. A bit of a quieter month this time around with 1 DS and 1 Game Boy title. DS will include Mario Hoops 3-on-3, and Game Boy will have Metal Gear Ghost Babel. Both of these are pretty obscure but great games, although Mario Hoops is going to require a proper stylus to play. October. Next, we've got 2 SNES and 1 GBA game. The SNES will get Mega Man X and Mega Man X2, while the GBA will get Advance Wars. Now obviously, the Mega Man X games already have a collection and Advance Wars has been remade, but by the time 2028 rolls around, most people will have forgotten this. November. This one game might sell 1 million Switch 2s on its own, and it's on the GameCube. I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's freaking Super Smash Bros. Melee. And there's a chance that this release is gonna coincide around when we get a new Smash Bros. too, so it'll be a really good stepping stone to get people excited for it. And something else that's especially enticing about Melee dropping on Switch Online is that Smash Bros. For the Wii was just gonna be Melee with online play originally, so we're kind of coming full circle here, which is also just really damn cool. December. To finish this year, we'll get 1 GameCube and 2 DS games. These include Sonic Adventure 2 Battle for the GameCube, then Star Fox Command and Hotel Dusk Room 215 for the DS. All of these are stellar titles and a great way to wrap up the year. And that gives us 37 games for 2028, which isn't that much, but at this point it hardly matters. Assuming that a large majority of these games haven't been delisted at this point, Switch Online is a crazy good value. There are so many fantastic games on here from so many different systems now. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we just see less games in general getting released because Nintendo is legitimately running out of them to drip feed. So let's move into 2029 and see what comes next. January. This will be a very small month with two NES titles, Contra and Bionic Commando. They're both pretty fun, but most people will be ignoring them since the Smash fans are still playing Melee Online. February. This will likely be the last new system introduced to the Switch 2, and that's the Nintendo Wii. To celebrate the release, a Switch Wii Remote and a Switch Nunchuck can be purchased with a Switch Online membership for $59.99. They'll look virtually the same as you'd expect, except that the Wii Remote will have a few extra buttons, and the 1 and 2 are replaced with X and Y. The Nunchuck will have their Z and C buttons also replaced with R and ZR. Both controllers will also be wireless and not require a dongle to connect together, and they'll have new charging points for USB-C. The only true dilemma with this is that the controllers are inherently going to get a little desynced. That is, unless it comes with a Wii sensor bar. That would be insane. Not going to happen though. So the emulator, whatever they do for it, it's going to need to have some sort of option to be able to hotkey some sort of sync button at like any point in time, because it's going to happen a lot. The price of Switch Online will remain the same if you already have the bundle, but you can also choose to get Wii games separately for $20 a year. So now it really makes sense to just get the bundle. As for what the launch games are going to be, we'll get Super Mario Galaxy, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Zack and Wiki Quest for Barbaros Treasure, Wii Sports, Wii Play, Endless Ocean Blue World, and Mad World. So a very large selection of titles here, and people will be super excited to be able to play Wii Sports and Wii Play online. And Nintendo will also be clowned on for skipping out on Mario Galaxy 2 yet again. March. After how bonkers February was, we'll get 2 Wii and 2 DS games, those being The Last Story and Pokemon Battle Revolution for the Wii, and Rhythm Heaven and Pack and Roll for the DS. A vocal minority will be freaking out that Rhythm Heaven's getting a release at all, while others are still going to be demanding Nintendo to drop Mario Galaxy 2. April. This will be a fun one with 2 Wii and 1 SNES game. We'll get Mario Kart Wii and Sin and Punishment Star Successor, while the SNES will get Illusion of Gaia. While all these are really stellar titles, people are truly going to be hyped about Mario Kart Wii since you'll be able to play online again after a decade of the Wii servers being shut down. Unless you know what Wiimpy is. May. Next, we'll get 2 N64 and 1 Game Boy. The N64 titles will be Hydro Thunder and Body Harvest, while Game Boy will be Mole Mania. So it's going to be a pretty dead month, but that hardly matters when Mario Kart Wii came out the month before. People are going to be raving about that for quite a while, considering the Switch 2 is now going to have every single Mario Kart game on there except for Mario Kart 7. June. This time, we're getting 2 Wii and 2 Genesis games. The Wii games are WarioWare Smooth Moves and The Conduit, and the Genesis games are Super Thunder Blade and Shadow Dancer The Secret of Shinobi. It'll be a bunch of odd picks, but having Smooth Moves back should be a lot of fun. July. This will be another great month with 2 Wii and 1 GBA game. The Wii will include Super Paper Mario and A Boy and His Blob, while the GBA will have Hamtaro Rainbow Rescue. The Switch 2 is going to be the ultimate Paper Mario machine at this point, with the only games missing being Sticker Star and Color Splash. August. We're just getting 3DS games, but all of them are fantastic picks. We'll get Super Princess Peach, Elite Beat Agents, and Resident Evil Deadly Silence. Fans will be excited about Super Princess Peach and also completely look over how great Elite Beat Agents is. September. Next is another smaller month with 1 GBA and 1 Gamecube game. These include Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team, and the Gamecube will get Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. The Mystery Dungeon games may have gotten a remake on the Switch already, but the originals also being available makes a lot of sense since it'll have been several years since the remake came out. Remember, we're in 2029 right now, so yes, it will have been a very, very long time. October. We'll get 1 NES and 2 SNES games, the NES one being Mega Man 2, and the SNES games are Mega Man X3 and Mega Man Soccer. So while it's a big Mega Man celebration, they're also all games you could play on a few different collections as well. November. This time we'll get 3 Wii and 1 Game Boy Color game. The Wii ones being Donkey Kong Country Returns, Fortune Street, and a special version of Super Mario Galaxy. And for Game Boy Color, we'll just get Pokemon Pinball. So a few great titles to pick from here, and I imagine the special version of Galaxy will be nice to have since that game can take quite a while to 100%. December, and the year will finish off with 1 GameCube game, Wario World. This will be quite surprising to most people, and it'll be a fun one to revisit since most would assume Nintendo thought this didn't even exist. And that wraps up 2029 with 39 games. So still a pretty sizable amount, but definitely not as much as you would expect with a new console dropping this year. But again, we have to remember that Wii games are much more valuable than a lot of the older retro games, so they're going to be drip feeding them slower and slower and slower to be able to sell this server for longer and longer and longer. So with that said, let's move on to our final year for the video, 2030. January. We'll get 2 Wii titles, Kirby's Epic Yarn and Mushroom Men. Kirby fans will rejoice as usual, and Mushroom Men will likely be completely forgotten about a few days after it drops. February. This is about to be another huge month for Switch Online. Just like with Gen 1 through 3 of Pokemon a few years ago, Nintendo is finally releasing Gens 4 through 5. These include Pokemon Pearl, Diamond, Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, White 1 and 2, and Black 1 and 2. Again, there's a pretty good chance that these games are just going to be individual releases, or maybe they'll be one generation at a time, but I still feel like around this time period is when we're finally going to get the DS Pokemon titles. Online trading and battling will finally come to fruition for these games, as well as an option to save what you've caught to Pokemon Home. So now you can have pretty much any Pokemon that you want on the Switch. This will also be one of the last big hurrahs the service has for several years, as at this point it really has no choice but to slow down even more. March. This time we're just getting one Wii and one Gamecube game. The Wii one being Wario Land Shake It, and the Gamecube being Lost Kingdoms. So they're both pretty great games, but I imagine there'll still be a lot of buzz from all the DS Pokemon. April. We're not getting much of anything with one NES and one N64 game. The NES one will be Donkey Kong Jr. Math, while the N64 one will be Mickey's Speedway USA. So these are okay titles, but they're not too enticing. May. The people have been impatiently waiting, and the game they've yearned for is finally coming. That's right, we're getting 2 Wii titles here, Trauma Center Second Opinion, and Super Mario Galaxy 2. Finally, after over a year of Wii Online being out, Mario Galaxy 2 finally releases and we're all filled with glee. June. Another small month with one DS and one GBA game. The DS one being Kirby Canvas Curse and GBA Mr. Driller 2. It's been a while since a new Kirby game came out for the Switch, so it was only a matter of time. July. We've got another banger drop coming for the Wii, this one being new Super Mario Bros. Wii. This will be a really great one because not only is it one of the best-selling Wii games, but at this point, we're gonna have almost every single new Super Mario Bros. Game besides the 3DS one on one console. The Switch 2 could potentially be all about having entire collections of their catalog available to play, and that is super exciting. August. We'll have another decent month with one Genesis and 2 GameCube games, those being Clay Fighter on the Genesis and Mario Party 7 and Pokemon Coliseum on the GameCube. So now we'll have all the GameCube Mario Party games, and Pokemon Coliseum is another hidden gem. September. This will be another quiet drop, with just one DS game, except for the fact that it's Animal Crossing Wild World, so there could potentially be some excitement for it. The only thing here is that it's 2030 and we're actually coming kind of close to the end of the Switch 2 life cycle, so we'll likely already have another new Animal Crossing at this point in time. So there's a chance that only the morbidly curious will be interested in trying this game out. October. And for another small drop, we have Rayman 2: The Great Escape for the N64. It's not the best version of Rayman 2, but it's still a pretty solid title that people will likely be excited about. November. Next, we've got 2 Game Boy Color games, Pocket Bomberman and Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. As you can see, the good Game Boy games have officially dried up too, and we're just gonna get a bunch of random stuff from here on out. December. To end the year with a bang, we're getting one Wii game, Super Smash Bros. Brawl. This will be another massive title for Switch Online. So many people will get to experience this Subspace Emissary for the first time, and online play will be back, and hopefully it's better than it was on the Wii, so this will likely be a huge win for everyone. And that wraps up 2030 with 28 games. While the Switch 2 will probably still have a couple years of life left, I'm gonna stop here because this video is already long enough as it is. As for what Nintendo's gonna do after this point, well, it's really hard to say. Maybe they'll add 3DS games somehow, maybe they'll be ballsy add Virtual Boy, heck, maybe they'll do Sega Master System or TurboGrafx 16. The huge problem with this model is honestly just gonna be the cost on us. If there's really going to be a few hundred games available to play at any given time, there is no way that we're going to be doing a yearly fee. We're eventually going to switch to some sort of monthly fee, similar to what Netflix or Hulu does, although hopefully it's not super expensive. But I imagine around this time, or maybe a couple years after that, we're going to end up paying monthly around $8 to $12 a month to be able to have access to all these games. But wait, let's not forget about Nintendo's next Switch Online console, Squarespace. They're the best and most powerful place to create the slickest websites. New to Squarespace is the Fluid Engine, a next-generation design system that makes it even easier to make a website. There's also Squarespace extensions that connect your store to vetted third-party tools to extend functionality, and the analytics page makes it easy to see who's visiting your site and where people are coming from. Last year, I put together a website for my YouTube series Bandy's Universe, and I'm still keeping it up to date because of how easy it is to manage and organize the content. So with that, go to squarespace.com/Nathaniel to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The link is in the description. Wow, that was a lot harder to do than I expected it to be. Trying to find a balance of releasing really good games while also having at least solid filler titles is extremely difficult. And I don't envy Nintendo for having to do this. I'm glad I'm not the one making the decisions here. This is hard. And honestly, there's a chance that I was being too generous here. I really tried to space things out as much as I could. I left a lot of games blank on purpose, but even still, we could see Nintendo drip feed even harder. It could take even longer to get Gamecube and DS and Wii and so on the console. But either way, it's going to be pretty interesting to see how accurate this video ends up being by the time it's 2030. So come back to this video December 31st, 2030, and let me know how right and wrong I was. And with that, thanks for watching.